The quiet beginning. The hall was cold that morning, and Sandra Bullock sat alone in the back corner. She wasn't yet the woman the world would one day cheer for. She was just another actress waiting for her turn, clutching a folded piece of paper that held her lines. She had been to dozens of auditions before, but this one felt different. Something in the air felt uncertain, almost heavy. The director's assistant called her name. Her legs trembled as she stood, but she smiled anyway. When she walked in, a young man with calm eyes and long, dark hair sat quietly in the front row. It was Keanu Reeves. He was already known for his kindness on set, but in that moment he was just another actor too, watching, listening, thinking. The director looked tired. Producers whispered among themselves. Sandra took her mark, cleared her throat, and began to read. But halfway through the first line, her voice cracked. The microphone squeaked. Laughter came from somewhere in the room. Her cheeks turned red, and for a second she thought about leaving. Then she saw Keanu. He didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just smiled softly, almost as if he had been in that place before. Nervous, uncertain, hoping someone would see his worth. His calm eyes gave her something she hadn't felt in weeks. Safety. She took a deep breath, started again, and this time her words carried emotion. She wasn't just acting, she was feeling. The room went quiet. The director leaned forward. The producers stopped whispering. By the time she finished, there was silence. A good kind of silence. Then came Keanu's turn. His voice was low, steady, but full of quiet pain. He didn't perform the lines. He lived them. Sandra watched, almost forgetting her own nerves. The way he moved, the way his eyes softened on certain words. It felt real, like he wasn't pretending. When their eyes met during the final line, something changed. The world outside that small audition room didn't matter. There were no cameras, no fame, no crowd, just two people sharing the same fragile dream. When the scene ended, nobody spoke for a moment. Then the director said softly, "That was something?" Sandra smiled nervously. She gathered her things and was about to leave when Keanu stood up. "You did great," he said quietly. She almost didn't hear him. His tone was simple, but his words carried warmth. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and looked away, almost shyly. But that small moment stayed with her. Later, she would call it the moment that changed everything. Outside, the rain had started to fall. Sandra stood under a small canopy, replaying every second in her mind. She didn't know if she would get the part. She didn't even know if they would ever meet again. But something about that audition felt different. Not because of the script, but because of the connection. A week later, she got the call. She had been chosen, but when she asked who would play opposite her, the answer made her heartbeat quicken. Keanu Reeves. She didn't know that behind the scenes, Keanu had spoken to the director. He had told them she was the one, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. And so began a story that would change both their lives, a story built not on fame, but on quiet respect, shared struggles, and unseen acts of kindness that no one in the audience would ever truly know. The spark behind the camera. The first day on set began before sunrise. Sandra Bullock arrived early, her hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. The air was thick with the smell of paint and metal from the film set. Crew members hurried around, adjusting lights, setting up cameras, and calling out instructions. She felt invisible among them, just another actor trying to prove herself. Keanu Reeves walked in quietly, wearing a faded black jacket, hair still damp from the morning shower. He greeted everyone with a nod and a small smile. There was something gentle about the way he moved. Calm but focused, kind but distant, as if he carried a world of thoughts behind his eyes. When their eyes met, Sandra smiled softly. "Good morning," she said. He returned the smile. "You ready for this?" "Trying to be," she replied. The director shouted for everyone to take their positions. The first scene was emotional. Two people sitting in silence, both hiding pain behind forced smiles. As the camera rolled, Sandra felt her nerves return. But then she saw Keanu sitting across from her, his gaze steady and peaceful. Somehow, he made her feel safe again. Between takes, they barely spoke. Sometimes silence felt easier than words. But during lunch, they sat near each other under the shade of a large umbrella. Keanu noticed Sandra hadn't eaten much. "You should eat," he said softly. "You'll need energy for the night shots," she laughed. "I'm too nervous to eat. You'll be fine," he said. "You were great this morning." I could feel it. His voice was quiet but sure, like he believed it completely. Sandra looked at him curiously. "You always this calm?" "Not really," he said with a small grin. "I just try to stay kind. This business can make people forget that." Those words stayed with her all day. As the hours passed, she began to notice how Keanu treated everyone. The camera crew, the extras, even the janitor sweeping the floor. He listened when others spoke. He thanked people for small things. He carried his own props instead of asking someone else to do it. It wasn't about showing off. It was who he was. One evening, after a long shoot, Sandra saw him sitting on the edge of the set, fixing a broken prop chair. "That's not your job," she said, smiling. "It's okay," he replied. "Someone's job depends on this being fixed." "I'd rather help than wait." She sat beside him. "You're different, Keanu." "So are you," he said, looking up at her with that same calm warmth. "You make people feel seen." Their friendship began in those quiet moments, between takes, during late-night rehearsals, in car rides back from set. There were no big gestures, no dramatic confessions, just small, honest conversations about life, fear, and hope. One night, the director called for a difficult scene. It involved a heated argument, tears, shouting, and raw emotion. Sandra struggled through it. She couldn't get the words out right, and the director grew impatient. After the fifth take, she walked off set, fighting tears. Keanu followed her silently, giving her space. After a moment, he said, "You know, sometimes the best scenes aren't perfect. They're just real." She looked at him confused. "What do you mean?" "When people hurt, they don't say the right thing. They stumble. They break. That's what makes it human. Don't try to act it. Just feel it." His words cut through her frustration. When they returned to set, she didn't think about the camera or the lines. She just let the emotions flow. The result was powerful, so raw that even the crew went silent. When the director finally yelled, "Cut," there was a strange stillness in the air. Keanu gave her a small nod. She smiled back, eyes still glistening. It wasn't just a scene, it was a shared truth. From that night on, something shifted. Their chemistry became undeniable, both on-screen and off. The film crew began to whisper that the two shared an energy that couldn't be scripted, yet neither of them said a word about it. They didn't need to. As filming continued, Sandra started to see a different side of Keanu. Behind his calm smile, there was quiet pain. She learned about the losses he'd faced, the loneliness that fame couldn't fix. But he never used his sadness for attention. Instead, he turned it into kindness, for strangers, for colleagues, for friends like her. One evening, as they wrapped up a night scene, Sandra found him standing alone. "Looking at the stars, you okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking how lucky we are to be doing this, to tell stories that make people feel something." She smiled. "You really believe in that?" He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the set lights. "Yeah, stories change people. Sometimes one scene can change someone's whole life." She didn't know then how true those words would be, or how this film and this friendship would change both of theirs forever. The distance that brought them closer. The movie was halfway through filming when the rhythm of the days began to blend together. Long hours, cold coffee, half-eaten meals, and endless retakes. Yet, in between the exhaustion, something unspoken kept both Sandra and Keanu going. They were no longer just co-actors. They were becoming each other's quiet strength. One evening, the production moved to a new location, an abandoned bus depot at the edge of the city. The place smelled of rust and rain, with flickering streetlights and echoes of passing cars. The scene was complicated and dangerous. Explosions, smoke, and fast camera work. Everyone was tense. Sandra had never done such intense action before. As the director explained the sequence, she felt her hands shake. Keanu noticed. He leaned closer and said softly, "Don't worry, I'll be right beside you." Those words, simple and steady, settled her nerves. When the cameras rolled, she gave everything she had. The bus roared forward, explosions went off behind them, and for a moment it felt too real. The sound, the chaos, the heat. It overwhelmed her. When the scene ended, she gasped for air, trembling. Keanu reached for her hand. "You're okay," he whispered. His hand was warm, grounding her. "You did great." She nodded weakly, her voice breaking. "I thought I was going to mess it up." "You didn't," he said. "You made it real." That's what people will remember. That night after everyone left, Sandra stayed behind. She sat on the steps of the empty set, staring at the faint smoke still rising in the distance. Keanu walked over carrying 2 cups of tea. "You're still here?" he asked. "Just thinking," she said, "about how strange this all is. One day you're just another struggling actor. Then suddenly you're in a movie that could change your life." He sat beside her. "Life's strange like that," he said quietly. "Sometimes the things that scare you the most end up saving you." Sandra smiled faintly. "You sound like a philosopher," he shrugged, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. "Just someone who's seen enough to know fear doesn't always mean stop. Sometimes it means go." For a long while, they just sat in silence, watching the lights fade. There was no need for words. In that quiet moment, both felt something shift inside, a kind of comfort that didn't need explanation. As weeks passed, the rumors began. Journalists noticed their on-screen chemistry. Tabloids created stories that weren't true. Every interview, every press visit, someone would ask if they were together. Sandra laughed it off. Keanu smiled politely. But both knew those questions hit deeper than they wanted to admit. What people didn't see were the moments between takes. How Keanu brought her coffee when she was too tired to stand. How she slipped notes of encouragement into his script pages. How they both laughed late at night over the smallest things. But fame had a way of testing even the purest connections. When the studio decided to pause production for a week due to budget delays, everyone went their separate ways. Sandra flew home to visit her parents. Keanu stayed behind. During those days apart, something strange happened. She realized how quiet everything felt without him. No calm voice telling her it would be okay. No small smile across the set. Just silence. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just friendship. But when she returned to the set and saw him standing there, hands in pockets, smiling that gentle smile again, she felt something deep in her chest. Something that scared her and comforted her at the same time. They resumed filming with new energy. But life had its own script. One night, after a long shoot, Sandra received a phone call. Her old friend had been in an accident. She went silent, hands shaking. Keanu, who had been sitting nearby, noticed immediately. "What happened?" he asked. She could barely speak. It's bad." Without hesitation, Keanu offered to drive her. The studio tried to stop him. It was late, the schedule was tight, but he didn't care. They drove through the quiet city streets, headlights cutting through the fog. Neither spoke much. He just drove, steady and focused, like he was guiding her through more than just traffic. At the hospital, Sandra broke down. Keanu waited in the hallway, giving her space. When she finally came out, eyes red, he simply stood up and hugged her. No words, no questions, just a quiet embrace that told her she wasn't alone. That night changed everything. It wasn't about love or fame or headlines. It was about two people who saw each other not as stars, but as human beings, vulnerable, kind, imperfect, and real. In the weeks that followed, their bond deepened. The movie wrapped, but their connection didn't. People would later call their friendship magical, almost cinematic. But only they knew the truth. It wasn't magic. It was kindness, shared in silence and strength, and though they didn't say it aloud, both knew something had begun that would last far beyond the screen. The silence between fame and feeling, the movie wrapped with applause and exhaustion. The final scene had been shot in one take, a rare thing in Hollywood. When the director yelled, "Cut!" everyone clapped, hugged, and cried. Sandra Bullock stood under the studio lights, her heart full and uncertain. She had poured everything into this role, and so had Keanu. As the crew packed up, she noticed Keanu standing alone near the exit, quietly thanking the lighting technicians one by one. He wasn't celebrating loudly like the others. He never did. She walked up to him, still in costume, her makeup slightly smudged. That's it, she said softly. We did it, he smiled. We did. There was a pause. Then he said, almost in a whisper, You were incredible, Sandra. So were you, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. But deep down, she already felt the weight of what came next. Filming had created a world of shared emotion, late-night talks, and quiet understanding. Now that world was ending. Soon they'd both go their separate ways. New roles, new cities, new people. 2 weeks later, the movie premiered. Sandra arrived wearing a simple black dress. Flashbulbs exploded around her as reporters shouted questions. Keanu stood a few feet away, calm as ever, wearing his usual dark suit and that soft, almost shy smile. When their eyes met across the red carpet, the noise around them seemed to fade. The premiere was a success. Critics praised their chemistry, calling it authentic, pure, and unforgettable. People began to wonder if the emotion they shared on screen had been real. Sandra smiled through every interview, repeating the same line, We're just good friends. But late that night, when she returned home and looked at the old call sheet from their first day on set, she couldn't help but remember every small kindness he had shown her. Every word, every silence. Keanu sent her a message that night. You were amazing today. Proud of you. She read it 3 times before replying. You too. You made it look easy. His reply came after a few minutes. Nothing about it was easy, but it was worth it. Their movie became a global success. Interviews, photo shoots, and award nominations followed. Their names were suddenly everywhere. Fans loved them together, but fame is strange. It connects you to the world while quietly pulling you apart. Weeks turned into months. Keanu went abroad for another film. Sandra stayed behind for press tours. They texted less often, and when they did, the messages grew shorter. Not because they didn't care, but because distance makes even words feel heavy. One night, while promoting the movie on a late-night show, the host asked Sandra, So, what's the real story between you and Keanu? The audience laughed and cheered. Sandra smiled politely and said, He's one of the kindest people I've ever met. That's the real story, the host grinned. Sounds like there's more to it. Sandra shook her head gently. Sometimes kindness is enough. The audience went quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that holds truth. After the show, she sat in her car, staring at the city lights. She wanted to call him, just to hear his voice, but she didn't. Instead, she wrote a message she never sent. I miss our quiet moments more than the spotlight. Months later, fate brought them together again. An award nomination. Their movie had been chosen for Best On-Screen Duo. They met backstage, surrounded by lights and people. But when he saw her, Keanu smiled the same way he had on that very first day. Calm, kind, real. It's been a while, she said, her voice soft. Yeah, he replied. But it doesn't feel like it. The presenter called their names. They walked on stage together, hand in hand, the crowd cheering wildly. They didn't win the award, but something else happened instead. As the camera zoomed in, they shared a small, genuine smile, the kind that told the world everything without saying a word. After the show, they sat in the green room, away from the crowd. Sandra looked at him and said, You know, people think what we have is just acting. Keanu chuckled. Let them think that, but it wasn't, was it? She asked quietly. He paused for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. No, he said softly. It never was. For a while, they just sat there in silence. Not awkward, not uncertain, just peaceful. The kind of silence that comes when 2 people understand each other completely, even if their paths lead in different directions. Soon, Keanu had to leave for another shoot. Before walking away, he turned to her and said, Whatever happens next, thank you. You reminded me why I love what I do. Sandra smiled, her heart heavy yet full. You reminded me who I really am. When the door closed behind him, she stood there for a long time, realizing that some connections aren't meant to fade. They just live quietly inside you, guiding you, reminding you that kindness can outlast even distance and fame. And though the world would remember them for a movie, she would remember him for something far greater. The way he made her believe again, not in love, but in simple human kindness. The reunion that no one expected years passed quietly. The movie that once brought Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves together had become a timeless classic. Fans still talked about their chemistry, replaying scenes that felt more real than acting. Both had gone on to do great things, different movies, different lives. But neither of them ever spoke much about that project again. Sandra built a strong career, known for her charm and strength. Yet in quiet interviews, when asked which film meant the most to her, she always smiled and said softly, "The one that changed how I saw people." She never said its name, but everyone knew. Keanu lived his life in the same calm rhythm. Simple clothes, motorcycle rides, quiet days far from the spotlight. He was respected for his humility, admired for his kindness. Yet in every deep interview, when asked if he ever felt a true connection on set, he would pause before replying, "Once, a long time ago." They hadn't seen each other in years. The film world moved fast and people drifted. But fate, as it often does, found a way to cross paths again. One autumn morning, Sandra received a letter. It wasn't from a studio or a fan, it was from the Film Association. They were planning a reunion event for the cast and crew of the movie that had defined both their early careers. 20 years had passed since its release. She hesitated at first. Part of her was afraid. Would it feel the same? Or had time changed everything? But something inside told her to go. The event was held in a quiet theater in Los Angeles. Old posters lined the walls. Soft music played in the background. As Sandra entered, memories flooded her mind. The smell of old sets, the sound of laughter, the echo of cut. After long takes, then she saw him. Keanu stood near the stage, talking kindly with a few crew members. His hair had traces of gray, but his eyes were still the same, gentle and thoughtful. When he turned and saw her, the noise around them faded, just like it used to. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Sandra smiled. "So we meet again." Keanu's smile was small but warm. "You look the same," he said softly. "That's a lie," she laughed. "A kind one," he replied. They walked to a quiet corner, away from the crowd. For a while, they just talked about life, work, loss, and small joys. They spoke about old friends, about the funny mistakes they made during filming, about the night they stayed late fixing that broken chair. At one point, Sandra looked at him and said, "I used to think that movie changed my career. Now I realize it changed my heart more." Keanu nodded slowly. "Me too. It reminded me that connection matters more than fame." The reunion ended with a small screening of the film. As the lights dimmed, they sat side by side, watching their younger selves on screen, so full of hope and emotion. The audience laughed and cried, but Sandra and Keanu sat quietly, lost in the past. During a scene where their characters shared a quiet moment, Sandra whispered, "I remember this day. You told me not to act, just feel." He smiled. "You did, and it changed everything." When the credits rolled, the audience stood in applause. Sandra turned to look at him, her eyes glistening. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said softly. "But maybe we were never meant to stay in that story. Maybe we were just meant to remind people what kindness looks like." Later that evening, they stood outside the theater under the soft glow of the streetlights. The night was calm, the air cool. Sandra pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Keanu noticed and offered his jacket just like he used to. "You never changed," she said, smiling. "Maybe that's not a bad thing," he replied gently. They talked for a while longer, about nothing and everything, life's small details, the strange peace of growing older, the comfort of being remembered for something good. As they said goodbye, Sandra felt something in her heart settle. It wasn't sadness or longing. It was peace, the kind that comes from knowing a chapter had closed beautifully, without regret. But as she walked toward her car, she heard Keanu call out softly, "Sandra?" She turned. He smiled, that same quiet, genuine smile that had once calmed her on set. "Thank you for seeing me even back then," her eyes softened. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't." They stood there for a moment, two souls who had once shared something the world could only guess at. Then she whispered, "Take care, Keanu." He nodded. Always. As she drove away, the city lights blurred outside her window, reflecting tears she didn't bother to hide. They weren't tears of pain, they were gratitude. Gratitude for a moment in time that had shaped her life in ways she couldn't explain. And somewhere in the quiet night, Keanu watched the tail lights fade, smiling softly to himself. Some people leave, some stories end, but the kindness they shared would stay forever, unwritten, unseen, but never forgotten. The moment that defined forever months passed after the reunion, and life returned to its quiet rhythm. Sandra Bullock dove into new projects, helping young actors and producing small films with heartfelt stories. Keanu Reeves continued his humble life, working on meaningful projects, avoiding fame's loud chaos. Yet, every now and then, when interviews brought up that old movie, both would smile in that same quiet way, like they were remembering something sacred. One morning, Sandra received an invitation she didn't expect. It was from a global humanitarian foundation announcing that Keanu would be receiving an award for his kindness and contributions to children's charities. They wanted her to present it. For a long time, she stared at the letter, her heart filled with warmth. She remembered the man who once fixed broken chairs and stayed late to help crew members. He had always been kind, long before the world started noticing it. The event was held in a large auditorium filled with artists, leaders, and volunteers. As Sandra arrived, the air buzzed with excitement. The screens showed montages of Keanu's quiet good deeds, scholarships, hospital donations, secret fundraisers, all done anonymously until others revealed them. When his name was announced, Keanu walked to the stage, dressed simply in a black suit. The audience rose to their feet, clapping. But when he saw Sandra standing at the podium, his steps slowed. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by that soft, humble smile that hadn't changed in decades. Sandra took a deep breath, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "There are people who change the world loudly," she began. "And then there are people who change it quietly, one act of kindness at a time. Tonight we honor someone who never asked for recognition, yet gave more than most ever will. I had the privilege of meeting him many years ago on a set that changed both our lives. Even then, before the fame, before the headlines, his kindness was the same." She paused, looking at him. "Keanu, you reminded me, and so many others, that goodness doesn't need a stage. It just needs a heart willing to care." The room was silent. Keanu's eyes shimmered with emotion as he accepted the award. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Thank you," he said softly. "It's strange how life works. We spend years chasing success, but it's the quiet moments that define us. The people who believe in us when we're unsure. The kindness that asks for nothing back." He turned toward her. "Sandra, you were one of those people. You reminded me that respect and empathy can exist even in a world that often forgets them." She smiled gently, her eyes glistening. The audience clapped again, some wiping away tears. After the event, they met backstage. There were no cameras, no microphones, just two old friends standing in a small hallway, surrounded by the hum of applause fading behind closed doors. "You didn't tell me you'd be here," he said, his voice soft. "I wanted to surprise you," she smiled, "and maybe say thank you. One last time. For what?" "For being real," she said simply. "For being the same person no matter how much the world changed." He chuckled lightly. "You were always better with words. You were always better with silence," she replied with a grin. They both laughed softly. The years between them felt lighter now, like time had folded, and they were back in that old audition room again, where it all began. Then as they prepared to leave, Sandra looked at him and said, "You know, people still talk about that movie. They say the chemistry was rare, almost unreal." He nodded, smiling faintly. "Maybe it was real, just not the kind people think." She tilted her head. "What kind, then?" "The kind that doesn't need to be explained," he said quietly. They stood there for a long moment, no scripts, no cameras, no lines to deliver. Just understanding. Outside, the night was calm. The city lights flickered like old memories. Before parting ways, Keanu handed her a small folded note. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "Something I wrote years ago," he said. never knew when to give it. When she unfolded it later in her car, she found only one short sentence written in his neat handwriting. "Thank you for making that one audition change everything." Her hands trembled slightly as she smiled through tears. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't a confession. It was something far more beautiful. A quiet acknowledgement of a bond that had shaped two lives. Unspoken but everlasting, as the years went on, they remained friends, not in the constant way of daily messages or public appearances, but in the deeper sense of knowing that someone out there still understood. They supported each other quietly from afar, never letting the noise of the world touch what they once shared. And when journalists tried to dig, when fans tried to guess, they both answered with the same simple truth. Some connections are not about romance. They're about kindness, respect, and the way one soul helps another find peace. In the end, their story wasn't about fame or awards, or even love in the usual sense. It was about something purer. Two people who met as strangers, lifted each other when the world wasn't watching, and walked through life changed by a single moment of understanding. Years later, when the film celebrated its 30th anniversary, Sandra stood on stage, now older, wiser, and smiling. She spoke softly to the crowd, but her words were meant for one person. "Every story begins somewhere," she said. "Ours began with one audition, and sometimes one moment of kindness can last a lifetime." In the audience, Keanu smiled quietly, his eyes reflecting the same peace they had shared from the very beginning. Their friendship became a reminder to the world that in a noisy world chasing applause, true beauty lives in silence, in empathy, in those rare souls who meet by chance and leave each other better than they found them. And though the cameras would fade and the screens would go dark, the story of that audition, the one that changed everything, would live on forever in the hearts of everyone who still believed in kindness.